Click on, click off, click on, click off. Then you son. Clicking come from thumb, not wrist. Howdy YouTubers! Today's video will cover ThruNite's Ti4. This is their 2 AAA size pen light, and in case you didn't get that reference before, that was from the Karate Kid back in the 80s. Yes, I'm a product of the 80s, but anyway. I'm pretty excited about this light because of the fact that I just reviewed the MT06, which they kindly sponsored, ThruNite that is, and not Nitecore, because they wanted a head-on comparison between their new pen light, which is the Ti4. Now, quick facts to know about this light, as mentioned, it's a 2 AAA size light. It can run on alkalines and as well as nickel metal hydrides, but because of the working battery range of 0.9 to 3 volts, lithium ion cells are not supported. Nor does it really need to, because wow, for a pin size of this light and pumping out a maximum of 252 lumens, it's just outstanding. Now before we get into the rest of the details, it did arrive in this box, came with nothing more than 2 spare O-rings and the instruction manual. So diving into the light itself, at the business end, it does feature a XP-G2 emitter, and it's coupled with a lightly orange peel reflector. Now this lens is not AR coated, at least that I can discern, as you can see there. But I don't know, I don't think it really needs it in this form size anyway. So it does feature a stainless steel clip already installed. And on the tail end, it does have a reverse clicky switch, and this switch produces one of the most satisfying clicks ever. I mean, if you were in class and you used to play around with one of these big pins or whatever, those clicky pins, you know, you will notice that they do vary in the way that they feel, and the tactile feedback provided by this particular pen is a freebie given away by Chase, but it's pretty good. Now, this particular one, like I said, it just mimics a real pen. It's just got this very nice, satisfying clicking to it. Now, by comparison, Nitecore's MT06, although reverse clicky as well, it's got slightly a spongy, mushy feel to it. So not quite as gratifying, and couple that with the fact that it does have a metal tail cap there, it does kind of grind on the side there. So it's kind of reminiscent of the V11R debacle where the metal switch was grinding on the side. But anyway, I do believe that that tail cap in is anodized aluminum as well, but I guess it's because of that fact that anodized aluminum rubbing on anodized aluminum, it's just super smooth, so I don't necessarily feel any grinding. Why am I making such a big deal out of this? Well, again, it's just part of the whole package, right? I mean, you're talking about a flashlight, you're going to cover the output, you're going to cover the functionality, and now you're going to cover, of course, the feedback of the single sole thing that you operate, which is the button, right? In the end, is it a big deal? No, but still, to some it may be. And just pointing it out, the head is removable, and that's actually the easier side to take off. So there's no spring on this end, nor is there a physical reverse battery protection like on the MT06. The threads are not square cut, but still they operate very smoothly. Now this end, the threads are anodized, so you could lock it out. There's an O-ring on that end, and taking apart the tail cap side, you notice that there's a fairly long protruding spring on this end, and also the fact that these threads are not anodized, so you wouldn't be able to lock it out from this end, but rather the head. Now, one thing of note though is that on the tail end of the body, there actually is this notch here. What this notch is for is to help retain the position of the clip actually, so that the clip doesn't rotate around. However though, I find that it's a little bit tricky to match up exactly. So getting the clip back on, as mentioned, you have to align the clip with that notch there, and it's at a 90-degree angle to the plane that the engraving is on. So you have to pretty much get it down to the nearest bottom before you could start like really fitting it into the notch. Because when it's too high, it's actually, the clip is being held back by that O-ring at the tip. So you can't really like say extend this down first and then screw this back on. It doesn't work that way. You kind of have to go in unison and then get it back on. So if you're having trouble reinstalling it, that's the tip for you there. Now getting into the comparison between ThruNite's Ti4 and Nitecore's MT06, I mean again, they're the same form factor, they both use 2 AAA cells, they are both reverse clicky lights. The major difference lies within the amount of levels, which the ThruNite provides a Firefly, low, high, as well as a hidden strobe mode, and whereas the MT06 is really just 2 levels and that's it. It's just low and high. The other main difference lies in the business end. So Nitecore elected to go with Cree's XQE emitter in their MT06. And again, as I had highlighted in my MT06 review, this particular emitter has largely, just not gained a huge following. I'm not certain why manufacturers haven't jumped all over it. This is pretty much one of the first lights that I'm aware of that utilizes this emitter. It's a really tiny emitter, and you couple that with a smooth reflector and reasonably deep for its size, that is. This thing packs a pretty decent punch throw-wise, right? So case in point, I'm going to shoot a beam out right now, and then I'm going to show you ThruNite Ti4. By comparison, as you can see, it's just a completely different beam, with the Ti4 being a broader, fatter beam, and the Nitecore's MT06 offering a tighter hotspot. The Ti4, by comparison, couples a orange peel reflector with the XP-G2 emitter, which, as you can see, is a much larger emitter. So again, much larger emitter in the same size reflector, you will always get a broader hotspot and less throw, but a floodier beam profile. So I've cut the lights and set the exposure on fixed, so that way you can get an idea of the difference between the output levels. On my left, I have the Nitecore's MT06. This is the low output level. And as you could likely see, there is kind of like a bit of PWM going on. And on my right hand side, I have ThruNite Ti4. That's the Firefly mode, as you can see there. Nice, very nice ultra low output. Next level up is their low. And again, as you can see, different implementation, not to mention the color profile. I do have this set, I think, on cloudy white balance. So the beam profile is probably a little bit cooler than what I'm seeing. The MT06 here, the beam is actually not as blue or cool in real life. And Nitecore's Ti4 here is probably just a tad more bit yellowish than that. Then now we got it on max output level. But the difference is that the Ti4 has yet another output level, and that's the hidden strobe mode. And it's a little tricky to get into, as I covered in the UI section, but there it is. So thereby, the Ti4 does offer more flexibility in terms of the total output level. If you don't really care for that many output levels, you just need a simple low and high, then I guess the MT06 should suffice for you. But I personally prefer the added benefit, especially of this nice Firefly output level. It's much more useful, for at least for me personally, at night. Plus, not to mention, there's certain occasions where you just really don't, even the low setting of the MT06 is a tad bit high, especially for dark adapted eyes. So it's just very nice to have this additional level here. Plus the strobe, I really honestly don't know how often you would require that in a penlight form factor, but it's just nice to have in case you ever need it for whatever reason. I've cut the lights and set the exposure to fixed to demonstrate the UI. So the Ti4 will always default to Firefly mode. There's no genuine true memory. It's really more a short-term memory. And in that aspect, it's actually identical to their Ti Christmas Edition light. It'll always start off in Firefly mode. Next would be low. And the next level high. Now that's the great thing about the reverse clickies, that you don't have to fully click in order to cycle it. Although I do find it a little bit finicky in that there's a fine line between a click and a half press. So I find like sometimes it's a little bit too easy to fully depress when I had only intended to really just half press. In order to access your strobe mode, as you likely saw there, you have to cycle through it pretty fast, and sometimes it's easy to miss. But there you go. The strobe mode will never be memorized in short-term memory, so if I shut off the light now, it'll always default back to Firefly mode. Now, if I had it in medium, let's say, or I should say low, I shut off the light, and then within 10 seconds, I turn it back on again, it will default back to that medium mode. But after 10-second eclipses, again, it will always default back to the Firefly mode. I think that that's actually pretty cool because of the fact that if you think about the reasons why you would need a pen light, most likely, I don't know, you're probably mucking around under a desk, or I don't know, if you're a dentist, you use it to check clients' teeth or mouth or what have you. But overall, I actually like this a lot, of the fact that you won't accidentally blind yourself. I suppose that if the pen light's UI had a sufficiently low mode as the default, then yeah, that shouldn't really matter. But you could always set it to that, or you could have the option to set it to high. But as far as the Ti4 goes, I think it's actually a pretty good implementation. Now, one other way to use this light is that you can kind of use it like a twisty. So you leave the switch on, then you kind of twist it on off. So in case you're holding an underhand mode, rather than reaching back to try to depress this switch, which technically I don't think it's possible to do with your pinky. I suppose you could. Kind of tad bit difficult, but anyway, could kind of use it like a twisty light right there. Now I've bumped each light up to maximum output in order to show you the profile of each, right? So coming apart roughly at the same distance. You can see here on the left side that the MT06 definitely offers an overall tighter hotspot and beam, whereas the Ti4 offers a much floodier profile, not just in the direct hotspot, which I'll step down now to give you a glimpse of that, but also there's yet additional added corona here, if you will, on the outer edge here after the flood part. Whereas the MT06 is pretty much clear-cut and defined. It's your hotspot, your flood beam, that's it. So depending on your use case, if, like, say you were mostly just doing short distances, and I mean like, say, mucking around inside a computer chassis, you know, replacing boards or whatever, I actually think that the Ti4, its floodier profile would offer the advantage here. But whereas if you were offering at a distance, I would say beyond 2 feet, so working underneath a engine, and this I recall from memory when testing Pelican's 1910 and 1920 series, I found like once it goes beyond 2 feet, a thrower actually wouldn't be too bad, in which case those two weren't too bad in that regard. So in that case, maybe the MT06 might be better for you. So again, take into consideration the distances that you'll be working at, as well as the overall type of beam profile. Would you prefer a tighter hotspot that has better throw, or would you like a more floodier profile that offers you a broader beam without a distinct hotspot, thereby creating a feedback to your eyes and impacting your vision, your peripheral vision more like? Now size-wise, I finally have the MT06 to compare against. As you can see, amongst the 2X AAA size lights that I do have, it ranks as one of the longest, although just a tad short under the Kershaw, but just a weensy bit longer than the MT06, as well as the 2x AAA mag light. Now, incidentally, I did find my Maglite Solitaire. There it goes, haha. But overall, dimensionally, it's pretty much like a very thick pen, but other than that, you know, it shouldn't be too much of a problem carrying it. The diameter of the head is just a tad over ½ an inch, which is roughly 14.2 millimeters, and that's identical to the MT06. The tail cap side, however, is just a little smaller at 13.4 millimeters, or here under ½ an inch. Now, portability wise, it can vary depending on the bag that you carry. This is a Amazon Basics camera bag, and it actually has pretty generous portions for pen holders, so this one goes in very easily into that. I would say the clip is not as tight as the MT06, so I kind of feel like it won't hold as well as on thinner material. So like, say this one on the Amazon Basics is like nothing, so it could slide right out and won't really hold that well. Now here's the Think Tank sling bag, and like the Amazon Basics bag, it also does have very generous size for the pen holders. So again, no issues there, but as I had highlighted earlier, the tensile strength is not particularly heavy, so it just comes in and out very, very easily. That could be a pro and con, right? Pro for those who would like to just easily be able to pull it out, but con for those who would like to make sure that it stays put. Due to its slim form factor, you really should have no problems fitting this into the side pocket, or I should say into your front pocket, and just kind of like, it'll just disappear on the side here. And likewise for the back pocket as well. And here it is tucked into a shirt pocket, although like I covered in the MT06 video, I'm not sure if that's a fashion faux pas, but if that's your preferred method of carry, this is how it looks like. Handling wise, given it's such a small form factor, there really shouldn't be much issues with it. Unless, like, say, as I usually covered on the larger soda can style lights, if you have any wrist ailments, that might be an issue. But I do know from experience, though, because I previously have had carpal tunnel syndrome, that on those days where it's really, really hurting so bad, getting your hand to grip like this isn't easy either. That causes pain. So, but overall, provided you don't really have any ailments of the wrist or arm or hand, like I said, handling wise, shouldn't be too bad. It's easy to carry overhand, underhand. Changing the modes, as mentioned, if you use it in the Twisty mode with both hands, you shouldn't have to worry about carrying it underhanded. And as I also covered in the MT06 video, if you were previously in the habit of flipping your pens, this has a pretty good balance, so you could do likewise. Pinky was never that great at it. It was more the transition from the ring to the middle finger. That's a lot easier, but for what it's worth, oops, there you go. Fit and finish wise, it's a relatively simple structure, so there's really not much that can go wrong. These threads go on very smoothly, there's no issues there. Everything is fully deburred. The anodizing, no flaws in it. If there was one nitpick, it would be about the laser engraving, which doesn't seem up to par compared to the regular lights. I don't know if it's maybe my particular sample, but This one had some blotchiness in it. The only reason I ever typically point it out is just about overall quality control. But beyond that one little thing, as I had mentioned, Clicky, one of the most satisfying tactile feedback on a Clicky switch. And the grooves on this side, although not anodized, still operates very smoothly. So that pretty much just sums it up. No real major issues to report. So I just wrapped up the runtime for both the Ti4 as well as the MT06, and again, as usual, I'll highlight the light and its details, right? This was the manufacturer specs. They rated it at 252 lumens on high for 51 minutes, and for the MT06, it was 165 lumens at 45 minutes. The cell used was an Eneloop, two of them, AAA size, 800 milliamps, the nickel metal hydrides with a 1.2 volt nominal. There's no PCB on those. And the starting voltage was 2.9, probably a little over. I think it was more like 1.46, but close enough. And the ending voltage for the Ti4, in this case, this was actually at 2 volts, but I had waited a little while before I actually got to measuring the cell voltage. So it was pretty much 1 volt as rest, whereas on the MT06, I measured it pretty much right after I stopped the runtime, and that was all the way down to like 0.78 to 0.85. So likely it could go a lot lower than that. So on alkaline cells, could probably drain out the whole thing and potentially be a battery vampire. The current, since I just finished this, I'm waiting for the cells to charge, so I'll get that later. But in terms of the runtime, so let's dig into the plot here. The blue one is the Ti4, and as you can see, immediately as soon as you turn it on, it may start off as high as I think it was around 280 something, but it starts nosediving immediately. And that pretty much, nosedive into a little bit around 240-ish around there, and runs in a semi-quasi regulated mode for, let's just say, close to half an hour before it does like a step down there. Then again, attempts to run, semi-regulated for a while there, and then it's just these weird steps. And as a matter of fact, this one towards the tail end of the run, it's almost as if it was boosting really hard to stay in regulation, and all of a sudden it just starts dying out and comes out of regulation there. So, but total runtime until it hits about 10% of the original measured value, and again, according to NC records, which is 30 seconds, between 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So I captured 238.5 at 30 seconds. So this was actually a little under what they had rated at, which was 252 lumens. But again, for the total runtime into 10 minutes, which should be about 23.8 lumens, it hit 43 minutes. Now, this is shy of the 51 minutes that they publish with two 900 milliamp cells. I don't know what brand those are, but again, I use Eneloop 800 milliamp. So a little shy there, but during that entire run, the average for that ANSI run, which is again, from the time it first started until it ends at 10%, you're talking about 189 lumens average. Right, so that's that runtime there. Max temperature reach was actually not too bad. It was only 110 lumens, hardly hand burning or scalding at all. The MT06, on the other hand, doesn't quite take as much of a nosedive, so it really attempts to be a little bit more aggressive on the current control, so thereby you can see the temperature rises significantly, right, because it does boost very hard to stay in regulation, and thereby the runtime is a bit shorter, comes in at 39 minutes, and over that average, it was 135 lumens, with the lumens measured at 30 seconds of 172.9. So this one was actually an outperformer. It came in above what they had claimed at 165 slightly. However, though, the max temperature reach was 124, so it's reasonably hot. I wouldn't say, scalding hot, but as I had published earlier in the TN36 UT review, the maximum suggested temperature for scalding in America, for at least water temperature wise, is 120 degrees. So this is slightly above that. So again, probably caution should be used when you're using it in high continuously. So overall, I can now see why, again, this XQE emitter just didn't receive much fanfare when it was released, because it was just kind of like bah humbug in terms of both the performance and in terms of the, I guess, efficiency, right? Because as you can see, the Ti4 bested in both overall lumens output as well as the temperature, a lower temperature, right? To be fair though, for what it is, the XQE is the better thrower after all, owing to its smaller footprint and inside that roughly the same size reflector, because both of them, the diameter was roughly the same. But if you cared more about the runtime and the overall output, the Ti4 would definitely be the light to get. Alright, so now we're going to get into this Excel spreadsheet that I created, even though it is subjective, but at least to objectify the subjectiveness of it, if you will. So basically, anything that I consider important, and this is consideration of that I'm going to carry a AAA size light around as my EDC, what are the things that are important to me? So those that are, I get rated at 5 points each. For those that are somewhat important, I rate it at 3 points, and then last but not least, those that are not really too important, I give it 1 point. So taking it from the top, get into the features first. The MT06 features 2 levels, has low and high, it's HA3 finish, it has an AR coated lens, smooth reflector, and reverse battery protection. Ti4 on the other hand has 3 levels, a nice firefly mode, the low high, a hidden strobe, a HA3, and an OP reflector. So the Ti4 gets the full points because it has that nice firefly mode, which I actually found more important than the AR lens or the reverse battery protection, so gets the full 5 points, MT06 to 4 points. Next up is the lumens range. The MT06 features a low of 32 to a high of 165, meanwhile the Ti4, much lower low and a higher high, it gets 0.3 to 252, thereby it takes a full 5 points. MT06 loses a few points in consideration of the ability of the Ti4, so 3 points there. The average lumens for the max output, this was as measured during my runtime testing. The Ti4 averaged 189 over that full run, and thereby is awarded the full 5 points. Meanwhile, the MT06 managed just 135, and that's at a lower level as well, so thereby it loses a few points there, gets 3 points. Next up is the runtime on the maximum output. Again, the Ti4 bests it a little bit, 51 minutes. Again, this is going by the manufacturer's rating, actually, not what I measured, but this is 51 minutes for the Ti4 and 45 minutes for the MT06, which isn't too far behind, so it loses 1 point there, it gets 4 points. Next up is maximum runtime. You have the Ti4, because of that firefly mode, it gets 137 hours. Your MT06, meanwhile, only manages 5 hours 15 minutes because its lowest setting is at 32 lumens. So this is from the consideration of, okay, you know what? This is not about in the wilderness or whatnot. I work in the city, so this is from the consideration of, okay, what if I was stuck on these subways for extended period of time, or I don't know, something happens in the city where the power goes out and I'm stuck somewhere and I really need a extended runtime. So because of that, it's a little comforting to know that I'm carrying a light that could last for a few days potentially. So thereby the Ti4 gets the full 5 points, meanwhile the MT06 loses a few points because it only manages 5 hours and it gets 2 points there. Warranty wise, they're actually both very close, but where the ThruNite edges Nitecore's is that they have a 24 months free replacement. And after October 1st of 2015, you actually get a $5 coupon on your next order. This is to reimburse you actually for shipping the light back in order to get that free replacement. So I thought that was a nice touch, because if something's going to happen to an electronic item, most very likely it's going to happen within the first 2 years. Beyond that, it's considered a bonus, to be honest with you. Well, of course, depending on the equipment. But I just figured it was nice to have that flexibility to just get a replacement, within the first 2 years. They also have a 30-day free return or replacement provided you purchase it directly from ThruNite.com or their Amazon store. And then last but not least, they also provide a limited lifetime warranty. What that means is they'll repair the light for free, but you need to pay for whatever parts, and of course paying to ship the light to them. I'm not sure about the return freight costs, but because that wasn't outlined, but I assume that they may cover it. I don't know. But if you're in a situation where you need warranty work, feel free to ask them. Nitecore is actually not too far off. It's just that they offer the 5-year free repair, no replacements, right? So, but at least it's 5 years, which is above the usual, I think, standard 1 or 2 years of most manufacturers out there. Of course, it's not like Surefire or PowerTech's lifetime warranty, but 5 years is not too shabby. It's just that you need to pay for the parts and the freight, meaning shipping it in. And they likewise also have a limited lifetime warranty, and as with ThruNite, it covers the labor but does not include maintenance or wear items, as well as the parts and the freight. All right, next up is the stuff that I found okay, not too important to me, so it gets 3 points in those categories. The fit and finish. In consideration of an EDC, I don't expect to abuse this. I don't expect it to be used in harsh environments. Worst case, I'll probably be crawling under the desk, checking on a computer or something like that, or I don't know, just supplementary light. So I really don't expect to subject this to harsh environments, so not too important to me. They're both excellent. There's really no issues to complain about. The only minor gripe is on the MT06. There's that gap between the head, and I just really don't understand why they did that. I don't know if it was intentional, but it loses 1 point for me there. So the Ti4 takes the full 3 points. Next up is the cost. To be honest with you, this is really wash. If you can afford $24.95, you can afford $25.95. But again, going by strictly point-based system, so MT06 takes... sorry, I had that typo there, so I corrected it. The MT06 takes the full 3 points, and the Ti4 takes home 2 points. This is also in consideration of what other lights are out there in this price range and its feature overall. So full 3 points for MT06, Ti4 2 points. Of course, if you really want to take into consideration, like I said, that extra Firefly mode, it would be a wash, but like I said, strictly point-based system, $24.95, $1 cheaper, it wins. Now the UI, both are reverse mechanical clickies, can be used as twisties. The Ti4 has an added benefit or potentially a con of that temporary memory, because who knows, maybe you don't care for it. But for me, it's one extra feature, so I awarded 2 points, but ultimately it really is a wash. So I gave both of them 2 points. The reason why they each lost a point is because there's no true memory mode. Now onto the accessories, not really important, but it's nice to have an extra O-ring, so the Ti4 gets an extra point there. Peak beam intensity, so as outlined in the comparison, the MT06 is definitely the thrower of the two. It's higher peak beam intensity, which translates to a further distance, so it takes those two categories there. Impact resistant, as mentioned, I don't expect to subject it to harsh environments. I'm not too worried about drops, but still, going strictly point-based system, Ti4 takes the point because of its 2 meter over the 1.5 meter of the MT06. Size-wise, again, they're very close, but going strictly point-based system, 128 by 14 over 132.9 times 14.2, so thereby it gets the point there. The MT06 can tail stand, so it gets a point there, and Nitecore actually rated it down to 2 meters, whereas ThruNite didn't, so it takes a point there. And last but not least is the weight. Again, that's really a wash, 0.3 grams. You're not even going to feel it. You're probably one of your hair follicles, 0.3 grams. Exaggerating, but you get the point. Still, strictly point-based system. MT06 gets a point there. So final tally is you got the MT06 at 33 points out of a total possibility of 47, and the Ti4 is the winner at 39 points. But for me personally, ignoring all of this, it really is that Firefly mode. That to me makes all the difference between these two lights for me personally. Feel free to use this as a template if you're kind of struggling, you're indecisive between two lights. Hopefully this could help it break it down for you, what's really important to you. And if you need the actual Excel template, feel free to throw into the comments or message me and I'll be happy to email you a copy. I've decided to change things up with my lux measurements because I feel like the basement just wasn't giving a good idea of the beam. At least this is a little better. It's not perfect, but as this part of this change-up, I had to reduce the meters down to 4 meters. So right now I'm still using my XENO G10 V2. This is the first time I'm doing this, so I don't know off the top of my head what is the target goal. It used to be 220 at 5 meters. I'm now getting about 345 roughly at 4 meters. So I'll put into the caption what that is, but this is going to be my new setup going forward. Now the camera is locked on manual exposure, is 1/60th of a second, f2.8, and it's now ISO 800. Compared to what I'm seeing in real life, this matches reasonably well. Perhaps the screen is just a teensy little brighter, so just keep that in mind. It is locked into daytime white balance, so the coloring is relatively accurate. The wall that I'm shining at is actually an off, I would say, yellowish, beigeish color, but the trim, the molding, and that door is pure white, so at least that gives you a reference point in terms of the beam color. So first up, we have ThruNite's Ti4. Give this into 30 seconds. So ThruNite had published a peak beam intensity of 1120 candela. That should translate to 70 lux at 4 meters, but not quite getting that. And again, keeping in mind that my measurements have been historically low, but still, I did have a few outperformers, like in the case of Mini TN30, Now Nitecore, on the other hand, with their MT06 and that smooth beam and that tiny emitter XQE, was designed definitely as a thrower. They had published a peak beam intensity of 2120 candela, and that should translate roughly to 132.5 lux at 4 meters. I'm just going to hold this here and give it into 30 seconds and put into the caption what I captured peak between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. And as you can see here, it's definitely a much tighter hotspot versus the Ti4. I mean, in terms of overall floodiness, still not too bad. And again, unfortunately, just given the distances that I'm at 4 meter, plus this setup in this room, it's a relatively short attic. I'm actually in the attic now. So, not perfect, but hopefully it should give you a pretty good idea of the comparison between these two lights. So in the end, they actually were both pretty close because, as mentioned, they're very similar lights, but as I had covered previously in the head-to-head comparison, the benefit of that firefly mode, to me, it just makes the world of difference. So that is the key differentiator above and beyond anything else. So all things considering, if let's just say the lumens output, at least the max output, was the same, that extra firefly mode is just so handy, especially at night. It doesn't destroy your night adapted eyes. 32 lumens at night, it's just a bit much. Never mind at night, even when I was working on the computers, poking around in there, at the ranges that I'm working on, which is typically within 2 feet of the chassis, and I'm swapping out the PCI board or whatever, like video card, or I'm checking on something inside the computer chassis, 32 lumens is just a bit much. Couple that with the fact that this does have a tight hotspot and all that light intensity concentrated there, it just is a little uneasy on the eyes, whereas the floodier beam profile and the slightly lower 24 lumens was much easier on eyes and better to work with inside a computer chassis. That's one specific use case. Again, as mentioned previously when I was reviewing the Pelican lights, I did actually like the thrower beam profile when I was working underneath the car engine, changing out the oil, and the distances there I was working at was beyond 2 feet. So that I actually did like a thrower better. So overall, again, take into consideration what are your primary needs. If you need a thrower, MT06 is definitely the one to go for. If you need a floodier, broader profile with that extra nice firefly mode, the Ti4 should definitely be your top priority. But at the end of the day, if it was my money and I had to choose just one light, it would definitely be the Ti4. Congrats, ThruNite, you won this round. Let's see if there's any more competitors in the future. And folks, that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed the head-to-head comparison. Please stay tuned for more videos.